So, with this new series of Building a Safe Space, I'm going to kind of aim it at children who are maybe entering high school, so ages 13 and up. The Postmodern playlist, which is the first playlist that I made, was kind of like a quick survey of where are my thoughts going to take me. Trying to keep my audience open, just to kind of gauge where, like a natural progression from I just want to create a social media presence um, at any age to I am trying to understand where my life is right now and how to change if I need to, and what kind of forces around me may support or impede that endeavor. So, going through, I went through a little bit of the individual and the family units playlist after that one. After that, it went to popular culture and then the lifespan. And now I'm going to focus a little bit on if the viewer right now is somebody who's just beginning their life, so going into high school, and they're thinking about, I have my entire life ahead of me. I can think about this. Not many people at this age have the leisure to do that because they don't necessarily think that that's something that they might want to start at a young age. If they are, that's a wonderful thing because the earlier that you start wondering about these big questions and how to kind of plan your life, the more you will be a proactive agent in your life rather than a passive one that just kind of is constantly just reacting to what life does rather than trying to exert some kind of healthy influence and then build healthy leadership for yourself. So, the first foundation for understanding how to think about the world is to understand how you as yourself should view yourself. So, to have a healthy self-esteem and healthy kind of self-worth, you have to understand, well, what is it that is believed about humanity, first of all? So then you have to think, well, what do I think about humans? So you might go to artificial intelligence, you might go to creation ideas and stories, or you might wonder just about me as myself relative to other people. And I'm going to delve into that later on, but first I'll just kind of give a quick preview of uh, kind of the chronology of how to think long term with regards to what your lifespan can become and the stages to kind of go through. So after you've kind of built an existential kind of story for yourself or like a myth that you're welcome to kind of come back and revisit and adapt and change, the next step you want to do is wonder about the goals you want to build and how you want to kind of create benchmarks so that you know that you're monitoring and almost watching your progress and allowing yourself to reward yourself as you go. So I call it grit building, which means in the face of obstacles, am I going to give up on my goal or am I just going to recenter and kind of realign and then figure out, well, do I need to like reorient somehow to see why this goal isn't working? Or is it the goal is fine? I just need a new perspective on how to approach it. And then after that, you can wonder about your sexual identity because typically around high school, it's when we've already hit puberty or we're going to, or kind of through that phase anyway. So you want to start to wonder about like what's my body telling me? How am I reacting to it? What are the social norms? Is there anything that doesn't make sense that I need to kind of question? What's uncomfortable for me that I need to kind of slowly build some kind of comfort around? Anything that's kind of like a gradual exposure to a phobia is probably the best approach, just so that you don't build these negative associations in your mind that you don't realize are existing, and then you're unable to kind of resolve as you get older. The best way to kind of worry about this and make sure that it's not something you delay is to allow yourself to think that anytime that your mind is preoccupied with something biological, you were not going to be able to focus. It's going to take away from your focus. So just think about hunger, right? If you go to school without breakfast, you might realize that your brain is actually still sleeping in a way, meaning it's kind of foggy, you're not really absorbing any information. And then compare that with the day where you have breakfast and you go to school. You're already alert. You might find that your metabolism actually kicks in so that you get hungry faster, which is a good thing, which means at least your brain's working and it's consuming energy, which means you have to continually feed it. So maybe within 2 hours, you find, maybe between classes, I'm going to grab a quick bite or like have some juice or something to kind of keep me awake and alert. And then after that, you'll understand if my body is telling me, for example, that, there's somebody or there's some kind of stimulus around me that's arousing me, and I don't know how to think about how to address that, then you can start to think about that and talk about that. And I'm sure in health class, I think mandatory um, health classes are almost integrated into gym class. And I think first, it used to be in grade 9, you had to take gym class. I think in grade 10 as well. After that, I think it was an option. So it's almost like the system seems to kind of create a built-in way of helping us understand that learning about your body is very healthy and we should kind of invite ourselves into it rather than kind of delaying it. So with understanding sexuality, you'll understand the need to have healthy body image and then how to fuel your body and then how to create friendships. And then you'll understand why you'll be able to focus on your academics. And without that kind of basic foundation built, your studies will be affected and not in a healthy way. So if you think about Maslow's pyramid, Abraham Maslow was somebody who talked about almost like a hierarchy of needs. And the very foundation of it was food, shelter, and safety, right? So if you have that kind of fundamental security within yourself, you'll be able to progress to the next one until you finally reach self-actualization, which means you've built an identity that makes sense to you and you're able to relate it back to that kind of first step of what's my existential identity and why do I believe it? And I'm able to constantly revisit it as I'm going through life and adapt it and kind of um, allow other influences in to change how I feel without feeling threatened because I've given it a lot of thought already. The next one is Kohlberg's stages of moral development, which is what are the ways that we can allow ourselves to think about moral dilemmas that don't necessarily have a concrete right or wrong answer? So I have to think about all the different stages that I go through. The first one is usually self-interest, like to what degree am I able to not be egocentric? So, somebody is looking like they're about to pass out and I have 2 bottles of water, I can offer them one, right? That's not a big deal. If I have Gatorade bottle and a bottle of water, Gatorade bottle might be more necessary for them than the bottle of water, but I might think, I mean, I need the Gatorade too. So I might think, well, I'll give it to them. And then in doing so, I'll be rewarded in another way. And maybe, the water will actually quench my thirst more than the Gatorade because you're thinking metaphysically, I know that God has the capacity to do that without question. Um, as you go forward through the stages, I think I have them written down here. There's actually 3 levels, and within each level, there's 2 stages. So the first one, which is self-interest, it's ages 3 to 7, and it's called the pre-conventional stage, which is individuals don't really reason through moral principles. So you can think of a toddler. Um, Usually, they have a very difficult time sharing, and that's because they want to sort of integrate how they feel about an object and belonging and level of satisfaction with understanding how to maybe make meaning of what it is that they have. So if I have this bottle, for example, I can say this is mine and I'm just playing with it, but maybe it's not an actual bottle to drink, right? Maybe it just has like a lava lamp, right? So I'm just playing with it and somebody else wants it, but I haven't really made any kind of conclusion with what my brain is actually doing with like some kind of learning, right? So my brain's working and it's trying to build pathways and drive conclusions. And as it's doing that, somebody wants to take it away from me, but I'm not ready to. So I'll actually probably have a tantrum. I'll say no, right? Because somebody's interfering with my work, my play. So you can think about this as like anybody in an actual workplace, right? If they're busy or in school, if they're busy writing an essay or doing work and somebody's constantly interrupting them or trying to take away what they're doing, naturally they're going to get angry, right? So when we see children who aren't sharing, we usually see that as a negative way of understanding their behavior, but it's actually positive. I had a teacher that I worked with um, when I was in a school as an occasional ECE, and she was trying to explain this to me is that when we allow children to let themselves regulate when they're ready to share something, it's usually the best way to facilitate their own self-regulation. So if they know that somebody wants something that they have, they might, finish playing with it and then actually go to the next child and say, "Oh, okay, I'm done with it." If there's somebody who is maybe constantly fighting for resources, they might actually prolong their play just to see like how long can I keep this person waiting, right? And this will kind of inform different attachment styles that different children have as they grow. It's not to kind of negate, that they need to learn or that they will learn or like one attachment style is better than the other. We all have varying ways of learning and unlearning, and it's a good thing that we have diversity to learn from. But it's just to say that because like siblings and orders in birth affect all of like these different ways of having and expressing ideas, um, we by suppressing a way of judging, it's almost like we're allowing the kids to not feel judged for the way they feel and the way they act. And then eventually they'll acknowledge that, you know what, like it maybe didn't really feel good that I was holding something back from somebody because maybe I had that reciprocated and it wasn't a very good feeling. And that's where teachers can facilitate and they can kind of explain that, not necessarily to that child, but they can maybe just read a story about it. And then in that case, the children are able to see like stereotypical behaviors, how to address them, and then how to find them within themselves. And then that'll eventually kind of guide how they might kind of build goals for themselves. So the next stage, so the first stage, it breaks it down into two stages. The first one's punishment and then hedonism. So we might do something to avoid punishment. If, if instead read a story about sharing, kids might think, oh, it's just going to get me in trouble. So someone asks for something, I'll give it away right away. Right. Versus hedonism, which is they're motivated by personal pleasure and decisions towards a desired goal. So instead, if I read a book about sharing and then after I say, you know what, it's important to share, but make sure that you're actually done with something before you decide to share it, or you can invite someone to play with you and then you both have the opportunity to explore something together. Then it's actually a desired goal because you're building friendships, you're learning communication, you're understanding the pleasure of maybe creating fun with other activities because maybe you're learning about another person's interest. And so collaboration becomes a thing. The next level is conventional, which is reasoning, and that correlates with conventions. So, as we're going into the abstract age from concrete, so this is between ages 8 and 13, we'll start to get to moral reasoning based on external ethics. So, we'll be kind of watching for cues around other people and how they play with rules and competitiveness. And then we'll be able to understand what is it that's rewarded and what's kind of not rewarded. So if people see that when one person decides to uh, share ideas or share turns with like being a leader in a team or something like that, they'll see how that person just becomes popular, and then they'll decide to kind of embody those ideals, and then they'll see what the reflection of that is. The next is um, actually, sorry, this also kind of applies to how they start to understand uh, how to behave morally and like what civic laws are. So if they, watch that my parents, when they're speeding, they never get caught, right? Then they'll think, well, what's the point of speed limits? But if they end up, seeing that their parents are going beyond the speed limit, and there's a cop that drives by and says, like maybe points to them or actually pulls them over, then they'll say, okay, well, there is reward and punishment, or like there's some kind of discipline to discourage, non-healthy behavior. So they're building all these constructs in their minds so that they understand eventually how to build like an ethic for themselves. After that, we've got level 3, which is the post-conventional, and this is the adulthood. This is moral reasoning, and it's based on how we eventually build our identity and then a personal ethic. And this is basically what we have as a social contract, which involves common courtesies. So, if somebody's just, it's a really busy hallway, you're not walking around just like getting in everybody's way, but everybody's kind of trying to maintain their personal space as they're trying to make their way through. And then the universal ethic becomes a principle, which is human life is the most precious thing that we have, and we should value, and we shouldn't um, almost allow ourselves to think so low of people that we just use them as a means, especially if it's to make a profit. So this is where people say, if I have to, get to an end, it doesn't matter who I kind of throw out in the process if I end up getting rich, right? The idea is that's not a very healthy principle because you're going to be maybe up there with a lot of money, but with no friends. So after we get to an understanding of how to build your identity, you'll be able to understand how to support it. So if somebody challenges you, you can say, well, you know what, I've given it a lot of thought. I know there are lots of um, ways of viewing one dilemma, for example, but because there's no cut and dry way of seeing anything in the world, this is where I can be postmodern and say, relative to what my personal history was, what I understand of my social context, these are the reasons that I behave in this way, or I believe what I do believe, and I'm happy to engage with you without feeling like either of us have to walk away as though one of us was more correct than the other, right? Then it becomes kind of like an interlocutor where you're just happy to engage in new ideas and almost for food for thought for yourself and for the other person. And then from that, you understand Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, which is a way of thinking of like an egg, right? So it's like a very porous way of understanding how from an individual all the way out to the universe, you can say, and time, it's all very interconnected. So you can't really assume that anybody's in a vacuum. So the way it's kind of drawn is that the first circle, you can think of kind of like the earth or the levels of the earth from the core all the way to the earth's crust. You've got the individual, and that's basically your sex, if you're male or female, or if you decide to identify as transgender, and then your age and your health. So this is something that tends to be kind of biological. To some degree, you can change it, and it has a way of almost creating a fundamental idea about who you are outside of how you start to think about yourself. And it might actually inform how you begin to think about yourself. And this is after that, you've got the microsystem, which is it's the most influential, and it's basically what's going to emphasize the outside, like the universe and time, which is how your historical context is actually driven by time and will drive how you originally came to be that individual. So your sex, your age, and your health. So it's almost like you start at this in the center, you go out, and then you go back in, and then you're kind of trying to find out how they all interplay with each other. And in doing that, you understand that, yeah, I can see where dogma gets stuck because I didn't have a choice with which family I was born in, or like what time, like in history, or what geography. But if I actually take a step back and wonder, like, okay, knowing all of those three, I'm going to decide to change, right? And that's where sometimes people call themselves like converting, like they're going to go to a completely new worldview. My kind of point of contention with that is that sometimes in doing that, we actually lose our historical place. So if you instead say, I'm going to stay where I am because I need my historical story, but I'm just going to add to it, right? So if you think of a tree, right, you don't want to uproot your tree and then it'll basically fall because it maybe had like really, really deep roots and you might lose all that. Instead, just understand like maybe I'm just building new branches or I'm building new leaves or I'm having like new vibrant life that's coming to kind of inhabit with me. And then you can understand like the story of like Enchanted Forests and Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin and all these beautiful ideas that with media we've come to depict fairy tales and like Shrek and um, fables that kind of give life stories that aim to help us understand diversity by looking at nature and how there's, within one family of squirrels, you've got different kinds of squirrels and then you've got chipmunks, right? And then you've got mice, and then you've got rats. So it's almost like we can call them rodents, but if that's like the first thing that we think of when we think of like the forest, then you can think, okay, but the forest continues to live and survive, and it can be completely burnt down and it'll regenerate. Whereas humans, we tend to feel like as civilization, we're afraid to kind of restart. And then you wonder, well, how can a mouse like completely take on a civilization or ants, right? The smallest of creatures, and yet they can easily, take down any kind of structure. So it's almost a good way to kind of help us see how, as individuals, we shouldn't take for granted that whatever context we're born in, that we should just believe that it's true, right? We should revisit it and understand what dogmas are kind of enmeshed in that, and then revisit them and maybe break them down and reconstruct them. So that'll help us really form and solidify what our identity becomes. And then we just become that much more knowledgeable about the world and what we can kind of offer as kind of like new niches and new technologies. The next one is, yeah, so the microsystem is the most influential, and it usually involves the systems that the individual is most directly participating in. These usually include the family, the schools, we go to peers, health services, and the kind of temple that we go to, or if we subscribe to a particular way of thinking or like a belief system. The next one after that is kind of like soft skills. It's the mesosystem, and it's the relationship between all the different microsystems. So if you think of like, what is my family? Value. And then when I go to school, what are the kind of differentials that I have to kind of deal with? So if I practice something at home and I go to school and it's not practiced the same way, how do I figure that out? So these are basically known as the soft skills. There's like negotiating skills, there's resource seeking, initiative, industriousness, emotional intelligence. So it's almost like, how do I understand curiosity in a healthy way and difference in a healthy way so that I'm not threatened when I see something that's different from what I'm maybe accustomed to. The next one after that is the exosystem, and this is basically voluntary participation because it's an option. We understand that lack of participation can actually hinder us, and continuing to be a little bit more proactive is healthy because regardless, it's going to impact us. And these are social services, local politics, neighbors, law, different industries, school board, healthcare, mass media. And these, yeah, as I said, they influence us indirectly. And so as we kind of develop through time, we'll understand, you know what, if I am coming against brick walls with meeting my goal, I almost have to see for myself, like, okay, well, maybe what have I neglected in the past that I need to be informed about so that I can become informed and then find out why these blocks are in place and then how to overcome them in a kind of socially acceptable way. The next one is the macro system, and this is less social in nature. So it usually involves like a kind of independent approach back to kind of identifying with yourself. So it's an intellectual and cultural integration, beliefs and ideals about society, and then building new ideas about them, and then identifying new ways of identifying with yourself. So macro system is basically summarized as the attitudes and ideologies of a culture. And then again, we're back to the kind of big circle of, I guess, the eggshell, you can say, and then oxygen. And you've got the chronosystem. And this is the socio-historical conditions of our personal history. So, and the way that it informs understanding of reality. So we've got liberty, freedom, equity, and then technology and ethics. And these are, again, habituated ways of seeing and thinking just because it's been the way we've been socialized. And sometimes it's hard to understand that different ways of seeing are okay. We just almost have to find a way to identify with who we are first so that when we do try something else, we're not completely unpegged and we're just like, okay, this is what I already know. What can I remove and replace? What would I replace it with? And then how is that going to, if any way, fundamentally change anything about what my social circle will look thereafter? And then um, if you understand that, you'll understand why the chrono system, which is kind of like that big overarching system that kind of places us in history, you'll understand why religion and practices and culture don't necessarily inform faith. So sometimes you'll have the question of, um, why do some cultures have particular, almost particularities around intermarriage between religion, right? So you can say the belief tends to be that because you don't subscribe to our doctrine or law, uh, you'll have difficulties in needing like a goal or working together as a family to create a family and sustain one. I think that's a fallacy. If you have an understanding of the world and you're building one continually, having someone who has that goal is already enough of a foundation because just being born into a context of like I'm gonna call it pseudo religion because you don't really know. It's just basically your family, and you're just like by circumstance. This is what I've been taught. Maybe I haven't integrated it in a way to make it personal for myself yet. Having that almost standard is like a false security blanket because when you'll find that people who end up, using that as, oh, we both identify as Muslims and so do our family, for example, then, that should enable us to have a successful relationship. But if none of us have the same ideas about why we believe what we believe or why we want to continue to believe that, or if there's different like denominations of what we're trying to believe, and we understand we actually don't have a common understanding at all, then it's like, well, that initial kind of name was kind of like a misnomer. It kind of misled us more than it actually enabled us to understand something. So it's not a general rule, but it's definitely something to kind of be careful of as a kind of like a pitfall of how we can label ourselves and how we can maybe drop that label and maybe more identify with each other in a more global way. And then we'll be more inclusive and then we'll be able to understand um, how we're actually limiting ourselves by just trying to narrow ourselves into a subgroup rather than just broadening our horizon and allowing ourselves to build relationships and integrate with other people. And then we're not really creating an other. It's all like we're all just a human family and we're able to get along. So if you think of yourself as that's the long-term goal, this is what I want to become, you already feel like, yeah, I can build my heaven. Like there's really nothing in my way that I can't try to figure out how to overcome. And in doing that, I mean, what's really to stand my way? And you can think, yeah, there's nothing, but I have to be able to find how to build all these soft skills. So I need to learn how to build boundaries, understand how to communicate the need for my boundaries, which is to build healthy relationships that I want to maintain. And also because I need to be able to understand the skills that I have and the confidence I have in building on them and maintaining them and learning new ones. And in doing that, you can understand why sometimes parents are really hesitant when children try new things because often as parents we worry. Like the first thing is like, oh wait, I'm not going to be able to, um, you know, help if you are in trouble. And the idea is that's good because I need to learn the consequences of my actions without somebody always coming to my rescue. So that's something that's new for uh, children and parents kind of have to identify with is that we're so used to somebody always saying, you know, we can help you, or some children maybe never grew up with that and that's just their norm. They just know that they always have to figure out how to stand up for themselves. In which case they may have a step up, but now they just need to soften their skills and learn how to be assertive rather than maybe bullying. Maybe how to understand different ways of communicating something depending on who they're talking with. And as you kind of grow through life, you'll meet different people and you understand how to interact with different types of temperaments and personalities. And then you'll have kind of like a larger repertoire to build with. So that'll be my first kind of video, just to kind of give, hopefully, kind of like a long-term range view of what to kind of expect with this. I'm going to hopefully start another playlist that's going to be geared towards parents and how to allow their children to kind of feel confident in becoming individuals who are responsible and capable of being the person they want to be without us feeling like we have to worry and stand in their way or guide them or like kind of like build these fences or like these bumpers so they don't fall or get hurt. The idea is with grit, you are supposed to fall and then find the resilience to build yourself up again, then self-regulate your emotions to find out, you know, what delayed gratification was necessary, what impulse control do I need, and all this is what builds like a authentic human being who understands who they are and how to make like a positive impact in the world.